Greetings. Today I will share with you a terrifying yet mystical story. But before we begin, I want to ask you, have you ever had a feeling of déjà vu? Have you caught yourself thinking that this moment has already happened to you before? Have you seen something that made you stop and think for a second, as if foreshadowing something terrible? If so, then you are a special person who has unique abilities that are not available to ordinary people. You are able to see and feel things beyond the understanding of the average person, and this story is just for you. If you are ready, then perhaps we will begin. This is a story about a girl named Annabelle and her friends. Summer vacation was just beginning when 5 students from Montana decided to go to the ocean to have a lot of fun away from their parents and everyday worries. Annabelle and her father were checking the car before the trip, while the group of friends were slowly getting ready and packing their things in the trunk. The guys were joking, laughing, and looking forward to hitting the road. Annie's parents, as Annabelle was called by her relatives and friends, gave their instructions before the trip. Have a good rest, but don't forget to call us from time to time because we will worry. You may be adults, but you are still our children. Don't worry, Mr. Abe. I'll keep an eye on them, said Tim, the main ringleader of the group, because of whom the guys got into all sorts of trouble more than once. Oh God, anything but that. Annie, you are our only hope. Keep an eye on everyone there, and especially on that joker. I know him, said Mr. Abe, smiling. He hugged his daughter and wished her a good trip. The car disappeared around the corner, and then the girl's father saw some marks on the asphalt where the car had been. Strange, he thought. After all, they had checked everything thoroughly. Bending down and touching the stain with his fingers, Mr. Abe realized that it was machine oil. He began to call his daughter to warn her. Annabelle picked up the phone. The music was playing loudly in the car. Everyone was throwing things at each other and having fun. Having difficulty understanding what her father was saying, she promised to stop at the nearest gas station and check everything. Although the car was reliable, but apparently fate had decided otherwise this time. The girl did not attach much importance to her father's words and was not particularly worried about such a trifle as it seemed to her, and the others began to tell her not to be such a bore. Relax, said Jeff. We just drove away. What could happen? Indeed, thought Annabelle. Everything is fine. Let's stop and check everything later. After a few hours of driving, the car jerked slightly, and after a few seconds suddenly stalled. Jeff and Tim, under the influence of weed, began to laugh uncontrollably. Oh, our proper bore, Annie jinxed it, they said and continued smoking, not understanding the seriousness of the situation. Megan and Olivia, on the contrary, began to panic slightly. Okay, I'll go out now and see what can be done, said Annabelle and got out of the car. She opened the hood, but did not see any visible damage. The car broke down in the middle of a deserted highway, surrounded by dense forest. No gas station, not a single living soul, and not even a single sign around. The girls exchanged a few words and decided to call the emergency services. But as it turned out, there was no connection either. None of the cell phones could get a signal. The young people were at a loss. What to do? What to do? It was still unclear. Someone needs to stay near the car in case someone drives by, and the rest should go ahead and try to find help, or at least try to get a signal, Megan suggested. They consulted and decided that this would be the right thing to do. Damn, what a thing, cursed Jeff, a tall brunette with a grin that looked forced at that moment. You ruined all the fun. Okay, what can you do? Let Olivia stay with me. Yeah, baby, you go. Maybe we can find help, said Annabel. The road should lead somewhere. Tim, Megan, let's go. They started moving forward, hoping to find at least someone. The guys kept walking and walking, but they never met anyone, and there was still no contact. About 2 hours later, they came across an old slanted sign. The dark letters on the dried-out board were barely legible. Deadline hole, 500 meters. It's just a dead zone, Tim said sarcastically. Maybe we should move on. Girls like you shouldn't go to such scary places. Stop it, Annabel replied. It's creepy enough without your jokes. But I don't see any other option yet. I think we should turn around, she said hesitantly, feeling an icy chill run through her body. With each step, the girls felt even more uneasy, but they continued to walk pressed against each other. Meanwhile, Tim continued to talk nonsense, with his characteristic peculiar humor, which made them even more creepy. After walking a little more, they saw a house lost in the depths of the forest, where even the wind, running through the bare branches, seemed to whisper something ominous. It stands surrounded by a high blind hedge, as if it were trying to fence itself off from the outside world. Huge wrought iron gates, decorated with rusty patterns, creak at the slightest movement, as if greeting rare guests with a ghostly whisper. The house itself is massive, dark, with cracked walls that have long been swallowed by the shadow of time. The wooden window frames are warped, the shutters hang on rusty hinges, ready to slam shut at any moment from an invisible force. The roof is all cracked, covered with moss, but even it seems withered, as if nature itself has rejected this place. All the plants around are dead. The trees hang over the house, twisted, their dry branches like hands that reach out to it, but do not dare to touch it. The grass has turned black, the flowers have rotted, and there is a heavy, oppressive silence in the air. It seems that the house itself is looking at you, waiting for you to take a step closer. I don't like this place, Annabel whispered, nervously looking around. There was no light in the windows, which was not at all surprising. It seemed as if there had been no one here for 100 years. The massive doors were unlocked, although it took a lot of effort to open them. Naturally, there was no one inside either. Only a huge web, like silk blankets, hanging from the ceiling greeted them. The first thing the guys did was try to find a connection again, but there was still no connection in this god-forsaken place. However, there was no choice, and the students decided to spend the night here, as it was getting late. It was getting colder outside, and everyone was pretty tired and hungry. Someone needs to get back to the guys. Maybe they were lucky and were able to meet someone and ask for help. And if not, they shouldn't stay in the car alone. And in general, we should stick together. At the same time, we need to bring what we have: food, water, flashlights, and something to light this old fireplace. Let's at least warm up, said Annabel, squeezing her hands, because some strange feeling made her very nervous. Dear girls, I'll gladly go to the car and call the others. In the meantime, you look around here. Maybe you'll find something interesting or call ghosts to help you, Tim said, not changing his humorous habits. Tim, they said in unison. Well, how much longer? It's not funny anymore. Better hurry up. It will soon start getting dark. Well, why are you such bores? I get it. I'm already running. Don't be bored without me. Tim blew them a kiss and hurried after the others. Annabel and Megan stayed behind to look around. Upon entering, an ominous cold immediately felt, as if the walls had absorbed all the fears of the past. The air is thick, musty, smells of dampness, rot, and something sweetly putrid, as if someone's blood had once been spilled here. The floorboards creak under every step. their sound echoing through the huge dark corridors. Dusty mirrors, covered with a network of cracks, seem to have hidden other people's glances. Torn curtains slowly sway, as if someone invisible is whispering through the fabric. On the walls, in the dim light of rotten chandeliers, darkened portraits appear, their faces distorted over time, acquiring inhuman features. It seems that the eyes in the paintings follow every movement, and if you turn away, their expression changes. At the far end of the corridor is a massive staircase leading upward into the darkness. The railings are cold, sticky to the touch, as if someone's sweaty fingers had just squeezed them. On the second floor, there's a suite of rooms, the doors of which are either slightly open or tightly closed, as if they had just been slammed. In one of the rooms, there is a nursery, littered with broken dolls, with gouged out eyes. Their disfigured faces seem frozen in a silent scream. Among them is an old jukebox, and when the wind touches the keys, an eerie rattling melody comes from it. Further on is a room where the walls are covered with faded notes in different handwritings. Some are scratched with fingernails, others are written in a brown dried substance. One word is repeated more often than the others: death. Underfoot is a hatch leading to the basement. A suffocating smell of decay comes from the crack. If you go down, then there, among the rotten wooden beams and broken shelves, you can see someone's shadows that do not move. The girls felt completely uneasy, and they returned to the huge hallway with a high fireplace to wait for the others. Here they discovered another oddity. Among all this dust, cobwebs, and other horror, the furniture near the fireplace looked abandoned, but strangely not covered with a thick layer of dust. It seemed that someone had recently been here. When Tim, Olivia, and Jeff returned, everyone gathered around the fireplace. The girls opened the food. The boys lit a fire, which was strangely dim, and the flames seemed to twist in an unnatural dance. Everyone seemed to have calmed down and relaxed a little. Tim and Jeff, in their usual manner, continued to joke and slightly mock the girls, making angry sounds. At that moment, Annabelle felt a primal fear growing inside her. Her skin was covered in goosebumps, and her body froze for a second and dug into the sofa, as if an electric shock had passed through. "Everything okay, coward?" Jeff asked. Annabelle did not answer. She could not. Her mind was clouded by a terrible premonition, and her body was unable to move or make any sound. Suddenly, she abruptly straightened up and said, "Death," and pressed herself against the sofa again. Olivia and Megan jumped up to her. "Are you okay?" they asked, and the guys felt uneasy at that moment. "Yes, what's the matter?" asked Annabelle. "Nothing, you're just acting strange." "What death?" "Okay, let's calm down. Nothing terrible happened. We're probably all just really tired. We need to rest. Tomorrow we'll find a way out and go on as planned," said Megan. "Let's sleep." They didn't even suspect that death had already come for them and that this night would be their last. Tim. After a difficult and exhausting day, everyone finally fell asleep. In the middle of the night, Annabelle suddenly woke up in a cold sweat. The terrible feeling inside did not leave her even in her sleep. She grabbed her head and tried to calm herself down. She dreamed how they all died. Suddenly, she turned her gaze to the window overlooking the courtyard. In the dusty reflection of the glass, the girl imagined how hundreds of icicles fell down on the outline of a young man and killed him. Annabelle looked around. Everyone was asleep, but Tim was not among them. At the same time, Tim, hearing a suspicious sound somewhere in the distance, decided to go and see what was going on. Suddenly, a loud knock. Tim went out into the corridor. The light of the lantern picked out peeling wallpaper. He heard a whisper and then the scraping of claws on the floor. "Who's there?" There was no answer. Only the door suddenly slammed shut behind him. Tim turned and saw a tall figure in the corner. The creature had no face, only an empty dark cavity, shining with an endless darkness. It stepped forward, and the room was plunged into darkness. In a moment, everything around froze, and the old mansion was plunged into deathly silence. Even the wind, seeping through the cracked glass, seemed afraid to disturb the damn peace of this place. The guy walked on rotten boards that groaned under his weight, and the air was filled with the smell of dampness and old dust. He almost turned back, thinking that he imagined it all, but he heard it again. A muffled scraping, like claws scratching stone. Everything in his chest went cold, but he went on. Step. Another. The corridor led him into a spacious hall, where the moonlight spread across the floor like a pale shroud. And then he saw a huge mirror. It hung on the wall, massive, in a gilded frame covered with carved patterns that looked like twisted, writhing figures. The surface of the glass was murky, like swamp water. But that was not the worst thing. It suddenly moved. The mirror trembled as if breathing, and then slowly crawled upward, breaking away from the wall. The creaking of metal tore through the silence. It rose higher and higher until it found itself on the ceiling. The guy looked, unable to move. Something was moving in the depths of the mirror. Something was looking at him. And suddenly darkness flowed from the reflection. It oozed like thick smoke, writhing like living fingers reaching out to him. Annabelle heard the sound and began to wake the others in a panic. Something is wrong. Can you hear it? Tim is gone. Quick, let's run, she said, and everyone rushed toward the sound somewhere in the distance. When they saw Tim and ran closer, at that very moment the mirror exploded. There was a deafening bang, as if a thunderstorm had broken out in the sky. But instead of rain, a shower of fragments fell on the guy. They whistled in the air like a swarm of hungry wasps, biting into the skin, tearing flesh. He screamed, but the sound was immediately drowned out by blood. Glass needles pierced his face, throat, hands. He fell to his knees, clutching at his riddled body, but his fingers only fell into jagged holes. Cold, sticky darkness crawled into his mind. The last thing he saw was his mangled reflection in dozens of tiny fragments scattered across the floor. No! The room was filled with the wild screams of his friends. Death had taken him. Everyone was seized by wild horror and fear. No one understood how this was possible and why it had happened. Olivia brought an old sheet to cover the body. At that very moment, Annabelle turned her gaze to the lifeless Tim and saw in it the picture that she had imagined in the window. She began to understand that death itself was giving her a sign. Perhaps, if this was really so, she would be able to help and prevent the death of her comrades. But for now the guys were in shock from what they had experienced. They returned to the fireplace and began to think what to do. "We need to get out of here," Megan said. The girl ran out of the house and everyone else followed her. Jeff tried to catch a cell phone signal again, but nothing worked. They approached the gate, but as soon as they tried to open it, like an electric shock, an unknown force threw them back. "What's going on?" Jeff was indignant. "Step back, everyone." He tried to open the gate again, but the result was the same. Then he decided to try to climb over the fence, but this attempt did not lead to anything new. "We are all going to die here," Megan screamed in panic. The mansion did not let them go. After all, its owner was death itself, and she had completely different plans. Megan. There was no way out. Everyone returned back to the house. The girls were shaking with fear. Only Jeff and Annabelle tried to keep their cool. Megan, shocked by Tim's death, could not calm down and stop hysteria, because they were not just friends. They were united by a mutual feeling of sympathy, which was impossible to hide. She went to the bathroom to wash and at least a little bring herself to her senses. The sound of water flowing from the tap began to calm her down a little. The reflection in the mirror was shaking slightly, but she didn't pay attention to it, because the girl's body was shaking from the horror she had experienced. Megan turned on the shower faucet, hoping for hot water to take a shower. Meanwhile, downstairs, Annabelle saw something strange in the reflection of the shadows on the floor. The light from the moon was shining through the window and the lifeless bushes growing nearby. Olivia and Jeff came up to her and asked what was wrong. "I don't understand yet, but again this strange feeling," she answered. "Look," Annabelle screamed. "Do you see it too? Number, well, maybe some shadows. Something like a rope. But nothing like that." Jeff answered. "Right. A rope," said Annabelle. "I'm not sure, but I think it's a sign. Megan, she needs to be saved, quickly." After these words, everyone rushed upstairs. In the room, steam enveloped the bathroom in a thick curtain, settling in drops on the mirror. The girl stood under the hot streams, closed her eyes, enjoying the warmth that washed away fatigue and trembling. The water flowed down her skin, drummed on the tiles, filling the room with a soothing noise. But suddenly, cold, as if someone icy and lifeless slid their fingers along her ankle. Not drops of water, not a stream, but someone's hand. Her heart sank, her breath stopped. She jerked her leg away, but something pulled it down. In a panic, the girl turned around and tried to get out, but her wet feet slid along the slippery floor. In an instant, she fell back, painfully hitting the back of her head on the wall, causing the world to spin before her eyes. And at that very moment, the shower hose suddenly came to life. Like a snake's body, it suddenly tightened around her neck. The girl struggled, grabbed the smooth tube, trying to break the noose, but the hose only squeezed her throat tighter. Her eyes widened in horror. In panic, she writhed, trying to get up, but her knees were sliding in the water, her hands were slipping. There was not enough air. The mirror in front of her fogged up. And then, from within, words began to appear on it, as if someone invisible was running a finger along the glass. "She is always close." The vision swam before her eyes. Consciousness became clouded. "You will not be saved," something whispered, the voice of which sounded alien, as if beyond the edge of reality. She wheezed, tore the skin on her neck with her nails, but the hose seemed to be alive. It was not just suffocating, it was feeding on her. Megan fought, tried to break free, but her body seemed to no longer belong to her. Her last scream was cut off. Something was whispering in her ears, greedy, faceless. "Look." And she saw it in the mirror. A tall figure stood right behind her. There was no face, just a blurry spot from which thin black tentacles slowly extended. A last convulsive attempt to free herself, and a sharp jerk upward. The guys ran into the bathroom, but it was too late. The girl's vertebra cracked, her body went limp, and her soul left her. Everyone screamed at the same time and seemed to freeze in place in wild horror. Steam was still swirling in the air. The shower continued to pour hot water. Only now it was flowing down frozen fingers and glassy eyes. The word death was clearly written on the mirror, which began to melt, dissolving in the drops of steam that had settled on it. Silence. And then, a light creak. Olivia was slowly sliding down the wall, almost losing consciousness from horror and panic. Annabelle and Jeff picked her up and led her to the fireplace. They themselves returned to Megan's lifeless body. They wrapped her in some cloth they found in the next room and carried her to Tim. "Olivia, we need to leave. We need to run," Olivia screamed, pacing nervously from side to side. She was rushing around the room in agony, like a frightened animal in a trap. "We can't stay here. We tried, but the house won't let us out. You remember how the gate threw us back. Do you want to tempt fate again?" Annabelle asked. "I don't care anymore. I want to get out of here. I can't do this anymore." After these words, Olivia, despite all the persuasion and attempts to stop her, went outside. Annabel froze for a second. She felt a wild heat running through her body. Turning around, the girl saw how suddenly tongues of flame began to burst out of the fireplace. The once calm and measured fire seemed to be coming out. Now she understood that this was a sign. "What's wrong with you?" asked Jeff. "Did you see something?" "Yes. We must warn Olivia. She must be more careful." "I felt the fire," she answered. The young men followed their friend outside to warn her. The night had covered the old mansion with a thick blanket of darkness. The air was thick, filled with the smell of dampness and smoldering wood, and somewhere in the distance the trees rustled, as if whispering ominous secrets. The wind gently stirred the grass in the yard, but did not touch the gate. It stood motionless, black against the dim light of the moon, which flickered in the yard, as if it was going to go out at any moment. Olivia was breathing so hard, as if suffocating from lack of oxygen. Her chest rose and fell in a frantic rhythm. Her heart pounded against her ribs, trying to break free. There was a noise in her ears, and her lips were dry and began to become covered with bloody cracks. Her friends, they were gone. The house where death reigned had swallowed them. She didn't know how, but she felt a little more, and it would get to her too. The only way out was to try to open or climb over the gate. Despite what had happened before, they had already tried. She remembered the pain from the electric shock that the boys experienced trying to get out of this godforsaken place. It seemed that the darkness itself, wrapped around the fence, did not allow anyone to leave. But she could not stay here. Gritting her teeth, Olivia stepped towards the gate. Fear dug into her spine with icy needles. Her legs seemed to be frozen in front of them, but she tried not to pay attention. Her palms lay on the cold metal. A second, and an invisible force struck her, piercing her entire body. Annabel and Jeff ran up to her. Seeing what she was doing, the young people, frantically, in panic, tried to tell her about the vision. They shouted to her that she could burn. They tried to persuade her to get off and move away. But Olivia seemed not to hear anything. The girl's eyes were cloudy and mad. She screamed but did not retreat. Her body shuddered, her muscles contracted from the powerful discharge, but she clenched her teeth and, having endured the first convulsions, began to pull herself up. Her legs slid along the iron bars, finding support. She almost felt relief, but Jeff and Annabel screamed, breaking the silence of the damn place. Suddenly, the discharge again. This time it was 10 times stronger. Something flared up inside, as if her blood had turned into liquid fire. Olivia could not tear herself away. Her fingers seemed to have grown to the metal. She tried to scream, but her lips no longer obeyed, and only a broken wheeze escaped from her throat. Heat filled her body. It cracked and burst like dry wood in a fire. The gates were blazing with a furious fire. The smell of burnt skin and singed hair pierced the air. Sparks ran through her body, and the next moment it burst into flames, engulfed in the natural flames. Annabel tried to come closer, to pull the girl out of the metal fire trap. But Jeff pushed her away. He grabbed her in his arms and did not let go. "Stop, you can't help her any more," he said. Annabel screamed and shrank in fear and hopelessness. She could not watch her friend writhe on the gates, her muscles contracting in agony. But Olivia could no longer tear herself away. Silent despair froze in her eyes, and tears instantly evaporated, not even having time to roll down her cheeks. The flames were devouring her from the inside. The poor girl's body melted like candle wax, dripping in black drops onto the burnt, dry grass. Tongues of fire penetrated her chest, her lungs, her heart, until it burst in a final convulsive beat. Soon only a black, motionless figure remained, fused with metal, petrified in the last moment of horror, and the gate remained cold, as if nothing had happened. There was no trace of the flame. Annabelle and Jeff pressed themselves against each other. Tears flowed endlessly from their eyes. Jeff, the boys were left alone. They could not find a place for themselves. We can't die. Is this really our last night in this world? A wonderful and long life awaited us. We were supposed to finish our studies, find work, start families, and live to a ripe old age. Is this really all? I don't want to die, Annabelle sobbed. Suddenly Jeff felt some vibration. He reached into his jeans pocket and pulled out his phone. In all this madness, they had completely forgotten that they had them. After all, the hope for communication or a signal had long been lost. A message came, he said, and saw a weak signal on the phone. Inspired by hope, with trembling hands, he opened the messenger. But before he could write a word, the connection was lost again. His heart pounded loudly in his chest. Annabelle stood next to him and looked at him with despair, fear, but with hope for a miracle. They were locked here, but maybe if they climbed higher, somewhere on the roof, there the signal would be stronger, and the guys would be able to call the rescue service. Looking around, Jeff noticed an old spiral staircase around the corner of the mansion, leading up to the roof. Coming closer, the young men saw a small garden, surrounded by a fence made of metal spikes, behind which the steps began to go up. The railings looked rusty, covered in thick cobwebs, and the wooden floors looked rotten, but they had no choice. The guy climbed over the fence, came closer, and took the first step. The stairs creaked, then another. Darkness was visible through the cracks in the floor. At some point, it seemed to him that the shadows around were thickening, as if someone was watching him, but he shook his head and moved on. Each step on the stairs echoed with an ominous creak, but he continued to climb. There was very little left. Only the cold wind from the roof hit him right in the face, preventing him from concentrating. One single thought was pulsing in his head: communication. To escape. Annabelle stamped her feet, nervously moving her legs. Hearing some kind of crack behind her, she turned around and saw how a branch of an old tree breaks and falls down. She already understood what it could mean. The girl screamed at Jeff. "Get down immediately, I beg you." I saw the sign again. We will find another way to catch the signal. Please, I can't lose you too. The guy panicked, but pulled himself together and began to move back down. A sudden crack. Dull, wet, as if bones were breaking inside his body. The step under his foot shattered into splinters. Instinctively, he grabbed the handrail, but it only crunched pitifully, crumbling into rusty remains of iron under his fingers. The next second, he was already falling. The world turned upside down. The squeal of torn air pierced his ears, and he managed to notice how the wrought iron fence below was approaching, as if opening its arms for him. Then came the blow. Something cold and hard sank into his body. Torn flesh stretched taut on the points of the spears, like a puppet on strings. His hands twitched, trying to grab hold of anything, but his fingers only squeezed emptiness. The pain didn't come right away. At first there was only a terrible pressure inside, as if he had become part of this old cursed house. And then fire. A fire of pain flared up in his stomach, where one of the spears had pierced him through, squeezing hot, sticky insides out of the wound. The second blade sank into his chest, just below his heart. His lungs convulsed, trying to breathe, but instead he choked on his own blood. Warm, thick, metallic-tasting liquid flowed over his lips. pouring over his chin, dripping down, leaving scarlet streaks on the cold metal. Annabelle grabbed his hands, trying to do something, but she couldn't help him. Death was taking him. Jeff's breathing turned into a wheeze. He tried to inhale again, but his lungs wouldn't obey him anymore. His eyes opened wide, horror frozen in them. Through the cloudy veil, he saw a shadow leaning towards him, an entity in a robe with crooked and long arms. It watched and waited for the soul to finally leave his body. Annabelle screamed and held him with hands shaking in a fit of horror. She called his name, but the sound was muffled, distant, as if he had already plunged into darkness. His fingers trembled. His breath broke into a last gurgling exhalation. The world dissolved into a black, bottomless emptiness. Annabelle. The house stood, breathing dampness and oblivion, soaking in the pain of those who died within its walls. The silence was unnatural, oppressive. It was as if the mansion was holding its breath, watching her. In places the rotten boards creaked, as if whispering. The rotting beams cracked like the teeth of an old man waiting for his last breath. She returned here, staggering, stumbling with every step. Her hands were shaking, but not from the cold. There was emptiness in her eyes, a reflection of the horror she had seen that evening. They were dead. All of them. They screamed, called her, stretched out their hands, but nothing could save them. Now death awaited her. She knew it. She felt it. The fireplace was still burning in the center of the living room. The fire in it was the only living thing in this place, dancing, writhing, whispering something on the charred logs. Faint light jumped in reflections along the walls, drawing dancing shadows on them, but one shadow was motionless. In the corner, where the darkness seemed dense like a lump of resin, she stood. Death. The girl breathed intermittently. Each breath was sharp, painful, as if the air in this house was cutting her lungs from the inside. Her eyes burned with tears, but she had no more strength to cry. All her friends were dead. Their screams still rang in her ears like echoes of horror. They were dying before her eyes, torn apart, disappearing into the darkness that with every step squeezed her like a ring. And now she was alone. She took a step forward, feeling something sticky, squelching under her feet. Her own footprints, bloody, left behind as she ran, hid, fell, tried to find a way out. But there was no way out. She bit her lip, pressing her hands to her chest. Her shoulders shook. She moaned softly, almost inaudibly, but then the moan burst out as a scream. Sharp, desperate. It hit the walls, as if into the void of nothingness. Step. The shadow in the corner moved. She froze. Cold sweat ran down her back, clinging to her clothes in sticky drops. A tall, dark, faceless figure in the corner, with bony hands outstretched toward her, like a clot of horror filling the air, whispered, "Wait." Death. Annabelle held her hands out in front of her, as if she could touch this horror. As if she could convince it to back down, she asked. Why? Her voice was shaking, but there was still hope in it. Hope that this made sense. That this wasn't just a cruel, senseless massacre. The creature didn't answer right away. It waited, as if savoring her despair. Then a voice was heard. A whisper breaking through the walls, a whisper penetrating straight into the brain, spreading across consciousness like ink across water. They were supposed to die. This was their destiny. She clenched her hands into fists. A lump lodged in her throat. Tears filled her eyes. No, no. But why? For what? Why us and not someone else? But silence answered. It shouldn't be like this. The house groaned, as if answering her scream. There was a scraping sound in the walls. A beam in the ceiling sagged with a crack. The fire in the fireplace flared up more strongly, bursting out in tongues of flame. The shadow in the corner stirred and settled. It's time for you to go. The world around her shook. The floor beneath her feet shook as if in its death throes. Dust rained down from above, then chunks of plaster. Everything that was happening reminded her of an earthquake that was gaining momentum. She screamed, covering her head with her hands, but she knew there was nowhere to run. There was a deafening roar. The ceiling cracked, split, and a heavy concrete slab fell down. She didn't even have time to breathe, didn't have time to realize what was happening. Impact. The heavy slab crushed her body with terrifying ease. A terrible crushing, loud crunch of bones filled the air, and then a wet, sticky splash. Blood sprayed in all directions, splashing the walls and the fireplace grate. The debris smashed her head, crushed her ribs, twisted her limbs into unnatural positions. Her flesh was torn apart, flying into small particles. Blood flew up, mixing with dust. She was gone. In an instant, she simply wasn't there. Only small scraps of flesh, smeared on the floor, remained of her. The fireplace cracked deafeningly and the fire went out. And in the corner the shadow disappeared, leaving only a cold trace. Death did its job and went into the darkness of the other world, awaiting the arrival of new souls.